Welcome to Community Cafe, where strangers become new friends. New friends become old friends, and old friends become family. Please join our table or take a seat at the counter. We're glad you came. Hi, you're listening to Society BARTZ Radio, and I'm your host, Kate O'Neill. Today, we have another fine author. Back then, an overwhelming mix of grief, shock, and long-standing resentment forced the group to scatter. And Lindsay knew. She grew up and moved on. Everything changes when a decade after Edie's untimely death, Lindsay discovers an unsettling video that forces her to ask if Edie was actually murdered, and, worse, if Lindsay herself was unwittingly involved. Wow, what a trailer. Welcome to the show, ANDREA BARTZ.
Thanks so much, Katie. I'm glad to be here.
That really says a lot in that one paragraph about how this book reads.
Yeah, I really wanted to play a lot with, that resentment, that looking back on the past, and sort of that creepy feeling of not being entirely sure if you can trust yourself and your own memories. So there was a lot of fun elements to play with.
Before we get too deeply into the book, let's tell our listeners a little bit about you and where you're from.
Sure. So The Lost Night is my debut novel. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and the book came out this February.
Awesome. Did you grow up in New York?
I'm actually originally from the Milwaukee area, so I'm a Midwesterner through and through.
I kind of heard that in your voice. That's why I asked. I'm from Missouri, so I can appreciate that.
Oh, okay. I've tried to sort of beat the Midwest, vowels out of my speech, but you can detect it if you're from there yourself.
Well, they say that once you get it, you never quite lose it. So
Right.
I guess that's part of it. But that's all right. I don't mind hailing from the Midwest. It was a good place to go. Great place to grow up. I enjoyed it. Worked for me.
Yeah, exactly. Nice place to go home to, but just not where I call home these days.
Well, let's kind of take a look at The Lost Night. This is almost, what's the song? I just checked in to see what condition my condition was in. I like the fact that it alludes to the fact that she might have been a part of this, but you don't really know until later on in the story. Describe in your own words what you feel The Lost Night is about.
Sure. So The Lost Night is about a woman sort of uncovering the dark secrets surrounding her best friend's apparent suicide in a Brooklyn loft 10 years earlier. So to give just a touch more of detail on the plot, 10 years earlier, back in 2009, Lindsay and her sort of merry gang of friends were 23 years old. They were treating New York City like their playground. And sort of the epicenter of their social life was this sprawling loft building that was sort of these crummy artist lofts called Calhoun Lofts. And every Friday and Saturday night, you could find all of them and, a few hundred other 20-somethings partying in various parts of this big abandoned, former warehouse loft building. And so one night that started out like any other, everyone was partying and sort of lost track of each other. And the group's ringleader, Edie, was found dead late that night in her apartment with a suicide note on her computer and a bullet in her head. And it was horrible and sort of brought that era to an abrupt end, that sort of, manic, exciting post-grad era. So the story picks up, The Lost Night picks up 10 years later when Lindsay is 33 years old. She, has a job. She thinks she's moved on. And she, as you mentioned, sort of uncovers this evidence that suggests not only that it might not have been a suicide, as she always believed, but that she herself may have been involved. And of course, it was a night of a lot of partying. So she essentially begins scuba diving in her own past and trying to piece together what really happened that night. And sort of the more she digs, the more she realizes she didn't know, and the more sort of secrets come to light.
Now, in the book, you describe this, what I saw as a group of apartments where these young artists stay, and that's sort of their free love time, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. I mean, it was 2009, so it was deep in the recession. And I was 23 years old in 2009 myself, and moved to the city with big dreams. And then there kind of weren't jobs and weren't all the things that we'd been promised when we got our degrees and fell off the end of the conveyor belts. And so there was a lot of sort of response to that as like, okay, we're gonna party while the world burns. Like, we're gonna have fun and make art. And everyone was a photographer, and everyone had a Tumblr, and everyone was in a band. And it was just this sort of, like I said, this sort of manic, like we're having so much fun while we can before we're adults and have real responsibilities to deal with. And that was how it kind of felt for me when I was 23. But I will say, I thought it was unique to 2009 and the recession. But I've had people who are older than me read the book and then report back, oh, I really liked the stuff that was said in the 90s with all of the sort of post-grads partying. And so they mistakenly kind of move it around from 2009 back into the 90s. And so I think there is something a little bit universal about graduating, being on your own in a big city for the first time, and just feeling like the world is yours.
That's an interesting way to look at that, because I'm quite a bit older than you, and we looked to our time as, that was when Woodstock was going on, and nobody was really interested in school. They were much more interested in partying and having a good time. And there were a lot of things that just didn't happen quite the way we'd hoped that they would. And Pulp Fiction is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Things were very different. And who do you think is your most prominent character outside of Edie and Lindsay?
That is a great question. Prominent is an interesting way to put it. I mean, my favorite one to write was Damien, which is Lindsay's best friend at work. And he's just very funny and very sort of shoots from the hip and like brought sparkle to any scene that he was in. I loved writing any scenes that involved him. But beyond that, I think I had a lot of fun figuring out all of the characters who were part of that sort of Calhoun Loft group back in 2009. So there was this clique of Sarah, Alex, and Kevin, these three other characters who all sort of, were big parts of Lindsay's life 10 years ago, and now come back into her life 10 years later as she's trying to solve this mystery. And it was just really interesting sort of charting the ways that their lives had turned out and had changed, and her sort of squaring her memories of them as these free love 23-year-olds with who they are now in their 30s. So I think for me, they all kind of were equally, important in Lindsay's life and in the mystery and the story of the Lost Night.
So let's see, how can I say this? The character who has passed away, were there any leading hints as to who might have been involved?
Yes, and I know this to be the case because some people, let me go back. I'll tell you that I write without an outline. And so when I started the book, I had this premise, I had this dead body, and I didn't know who had done it. I also wrote in order to figure out who done it. And when I figured it out, I went and made sure everything made sense and added a few clues. But it was a surprise and a satisfying surprise to me. So what's funny is that definitely a minority, but a few people read it and decide, one chapter in that they know exactly what happened. And then they're just sort of like reviews their writing or things that they're tagging me on Twitter say like, oh, it was so predictable because I had it figured out from the start. And it makes me laugh because I'm like, I didn't know. So good for
How
you.
could they know?
I mean, yeah, how could they know? But, you can't, it's not satisfying to finish a whodunit and a mystery with something that's completely out of left field and wasn't seeded, right? It needs to feel surprising, but inevitable and satisfying. So I take it as a good sign that a very small minority just picked it up and said, this is how it's going to end. And that other people were surprised and hopefully felt like there was payoff for, the first 85% of the book.
All right. Who was your favorite character?
My favorite character, I think, as I mentioned, Damien was the most fun for me to write because he's just kind of a riot. I think Edie was my favorite character, though, in part because we never really see her head on. She's dead. So she's dead before the book begins. And so we don't see her in modern day. We only sort of see her reflected in how people remember her. And, that was something I wanted to play with in the book. There's these interstitials. There's some parts of the book that are told from other perspectives of people who also were close to Edie. And that sort of provides some, clues and furthering of the plot, but also serves to demonstrate how, we have this, we instinctually feel that our impression is the truth and that we understand reality and that, my understanding of this person and my impression of this person with whom I was close is correct. But the truth is we all experience different sides of someone. We see different sides. We hold different secrets for different people and know different things about other people. So it was really fun to sort of see her as a cipher and then also piece together who this person was into one cohesive, coherent, person, human, based on all of these different recollections and stories and moments.
Now, how do you see this shaping up? Is it going to be the precursor to a sequel?
No, so this is freestanding. I think I'm lovingly done with all of these characters and it's kind of wrapped up. But what is exciting is that the book was optioned for development as a TV series. So it was optioned by a production company called Cartel with Mila Kunis tapped to produce it. So I am excited to see that start to come together, and I'm very interested to see how they might translate it to the screen and what will change and what will stay the same.
I think because of the year involved in, in your stories, I think that Mila Kunis would probably be the right person. She is not a millennial, but she gets what was going on during the earlier time. And because she was probably a part of that generation somehow, she probably has a much better insight, if I may, to how the story should actually flow.
Yeah. I mean, I had some awesome calls with the team and just sort of hearing her reflect on how she saw it being translated and what sort of spoke to her and appealed to her. It was just clear that we were on the same page in terms of feeling like there was a really interesting opportunity to capture circa 2009 that Brooklyn world in a way that hasn't really been captured before. And yeah, she's about the same age as me, and so definitely has familiarity with lived through those same things. So yeah, I'm super excited to see what'll happen next with that.
No doubt. Have they given you any kind of a timeline?
No, not yet. I'm learning that it's a slow process and it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So I don't have any